Hey guys, so today we're continuing on our emotion regulation skills for summer. Last time we talked about opposite action. Today we're going back and talking about check the facts. And if you remember, each of our emotion regulation skills target a different piece of the emotion. And if you go back to page 213 in your notebook, that has that whole model of emotions, all the different pieces to it. So we've got the prompting event that starts the emotion going, interpretations in our mind, biological changes, action urges, and then outward expression of our emotion, followed by like after effects and secondary emotions. Opposite action pairs with that action urge piece of the emotion. Check the facts skill pairs with the interpretation piece. So the idea being that sometimes it's not the prompting event itself that's creating a really intense emotion for us, but it's the thoughts we're having after the prompting event that like are really spinning the emotion up, making it high intensity and keeping it firing so that we stay stuck in it. A simple example would be like if I'm sitting at a stoplight and the light turns to green and I don't go fast enough. The car behind me honks. I'm gonna have a physiological like startle reaction, right? Like just a little one, but like I'm gonna notice it. And like that will like start off just a little bit of adrenaline in my body. But if I start having thoughts about like, oh, what an asshole, why do you have to like lay on his horn so long? Like couldn't he have just been more patient? Like all those thoughts are fueling emotion into a situation that like had I not like got stuck on that thought process would have been over in less than 60 seconds. And that's the case for a lot of situations in life is like the prompting event, the thing itself, if we just move through it, it complete itself. But we get stuck in thoughts about like why we're so frustrated or like our justification and like we keep ourselves stuck in a loop. And so that's what the check the facts skill is to help us see is that when our thoughts are increasing our emotions, we have power to change them. And by changing them, we can create a happier, healthier physiological state for ourselves. So this check the facts skill has 6 steps to it. And the very first step is to label the emotion that you're experiencing. So remember, we've got 8 primary emotions. Love, shame, guilt, anger, happiness, fear, envy, jealousy. I'm forgetting one, but you get the picture. Basic emotions, right? So we want to start out by labeling the emotion, naming what it is, and an intensity, scale of 1 to 10. Remember, if we label our emotion and our intensity is a 7 or above, we're probably not in emotion regulation skills land. Like we're in distress tolerance land. We need to do like one of those physical skills to help us get our body regulated, or we need to practice radical acceptance until we get down to like a 6 or below. That's really when our brains have the mental capacity to apply the emotion regulation skills. Okay, so after we've labeled the event and the intensity, the next thing is to ask, what is the prompting event? What is the thing that set this into motion? We want to describe it using facts, right? We want to keep out our judgmental language, just like we would do in all mindfulness, like behavior X or thought X or incident, and label in terms of like what happened. But that's our first step. It's like, what caused this to happen? Number 2 is to ask yourself, what are my thoughts, interpretations, and assumptions I'm making? So we want to aim for that non-judgmental stance, but a lot of times, like we haven't been in non-judgmental stance when we got started. So like the car example, like if I'm thinking that person is an asshole or like they couldn't just be more patient or like making character judges about them. Those are all examples of the different types of thoughts and assumptions that keep us stuck in negative emotion land. Number 4, ask, am I assuming a threat? So I talked about the horn does set off a little bit of a reaction in my body, right? There's a startle response. And so that puts your body into fight or flight mode. But is there an actual threat to your life in that situation? Almost always not. And so a lot of times we get reactive and we start our nervous system off, especially if we have complex trauma, the childhood stuff that a lot of us have that plays into how our nervous system still operates as adults. So we have to like tell our nervous system like, oh, I'm assuming a threat that's not there. I am safe. We can do a little grounding exercise, like a little 4x4 breathing or the somatic experiencing where we just touch our bodies and go, this is my boundaries. I am safe within my boundaries. This is my face. I am safe within my head, all these things can help us in the moment go like, oh, my brain immediately responded to a threat, but there's not a threat. Sometimes the situation is like we're seeing a threat, but it's not like a physical threat, but it's an emotional threat to our ego, or like scarcity threat, a threat way out there. And so the next step is, if we've identified a threat and we're like focusing on that, to ask ourselves, what is the catastrophe? Like the car instance, the worst case scenario is like the guy gets out of his car and comes at me and starts yelling, right? Well, then I'm still in my car with the ability to drive off and he's out of it. So in even a catastrophe, I could handle it. And that's the extension of this process, is like, if I can't see that how to get away from like that worst case scenario, then ask myself, could I handle the worst case scenario? Again, most of us have like decent trauma backgrounds. We've lived through some rough shit. So that stuff we make up in our head, those messages we tell ourselves, they can get to us, but we're even strong enough to handle those scenarios. And the last step is to ask yourself, does the emotion and its intensity fit the facts? And so hopefully by the time you've pulled out these judgments and you've looked at the catastrophe, you've actually brought the intensity down by 50% just by going through these steps. If not, then you can go ahead and go on to opposite action. You can go on to self-soothing. Turning the mind is a good skill. We talk a lot about skill stacking, that we use one to help us get to the next one. But a lot of times this skill in and of itself is enough, because a lot of times our distress is coming from our thoughts and interpretations. And we have a lot of power to control and change those. We just have to practice mindfulness of thoughts and recognize, because we have brains, especially if we're in that like neurodivergent place, that get stuck in loops, ruminating, thinking the bad thoughts, worrying about the worst case scenario. And we have to be able to observe and go like, ooh, that's not helpful. I'm going to change this now and go down a different path. So that's your Check the Facts skill, and it is on page 228 for the handout. See y'all soon.